Hi guys. Let's start looking at questions. Jet lag. If there was a dragon in this game, would you name it Jet Lag? I think I would be obligated to. I think that that's something that I would just have to do. It has gotten to that point. That's a good question because I don't know how to answer the other one. I don't know where I would fit a dragon into this game. I'm going to keep thinking about that. Okay, regarding games that don't tell you how long they are, would you consider that issue an issue in a game like God of War, which I had no idea how close to the end I was ever? Or is there a reason that it's not an issue in bigger games? Yeah, so I made a point of specifying indie games as being, you know, this is a particular problem. I don't think that it can't be a problem in AAA games, but I think there's an advantage in AAA games of, you know, that the game is gonna be, it's gonna go on for a while. Like, and it's true that can vary quite a bit from game to game, but you know that it's going to be probably somewhere between like 8 and 20, 25 hours. Like that's the range that you expect. You're not going to sit down. Well, I mean, you might sit down for 8 hours and finish a game, I guess, if that's a thing that you do. But in general, you're not going to like sit down and play for a couple hours and expect to finish, right? You're going to expect to just be getting started. And you do a couple of those play sessions, and now I think actually the structure of the narrative, maybe that's another thing, is that AAA games are going to tend to have a more conservative narrative structure. It is easier to tell, like, okay, I'm still getting introduced to characters, or we are still grappling with the sort of first manifestation of the problem, or you know, this is the early success that is then going to turn tragic, and so we've got about half the game left before we reach the end. That's obviously not always the case. I guess the other thing that AAA games often do is they have much more explicit objectives, right? So the game will be defined by, we have to get to Colorado. And I don't know exactly how long it's going to take to get to Colorado, and I don't know exactly how many stops we're going to make in between. But when we go from, you know, when we go to Philadelphia, I have a sense of how much distance that is, and then we go to, I actually forget what the cities were in The Last of Us, but like I have a sense of what the scope of the game is going to be, because I guess it's a more conservative narrative. It has an obvious endpoint. The end is going to be the showdown between good and evil, or it's going to be us reaching our destination, or, I mean, like, one of the ones that drives me totally mad is Mass Effect 2. The story of Mass Effect 2 is so ridiculously, like, stupid simple, like, it's not even fun. But I will give you one thing, like, you know where you are in it. You know that, like, there's a you have to assemble your team to go on a suicide mission, and you know that when you hit that suicide mission button, you are entering the third act of the game. Like, that's you're ramping up for the ending, which is nice. Like, it's comforting to have that. And AAA games, I think, because of their length and because they tend to be less experimental in their narrative form, you're just going to see sort of more cues that let you know, that ease you into the game and then give you a sense of where it's going to go. Now, there are games that don't. So like God of War has kind of an arbitrary narrative cycle. It's you know what the ending is going to be, but you don't know what you have to do between here and there. Like each level is kind of its own little package, and you have no idea how many levels there are. I do consider that to be a downside, but again, because you're you have a sense, you still have a sense of what the investment in the game is going to be. You know that it's going to be between 8 and 24 hours, right? Which is a big range, but it's you're going to like settle in for this game. And you're probably not going to sit down at any point and say, I'm pretty sure this is it. I'm pretty sure we must, like, this must be the end, and then have it just keep going on. I mean, that can happen, and certainly in, like, the game that I'm thinking of is The Last of Us. That game went on for just a little bit too long for me, but I don't actually remember a moment when it seemed like it should be the end. It always seemed like, okay, we got a few hours left. Like, I don't know if that's 3 hours or 10 hours, but we got a few hours left. I'm going to settle in for at least a few hours until we get to the climax, and then, like, okay, this is the climax. Here we are. It's the end of the game. There's like maybe an hour or two left. And so, like, I can have a better sense of that. You have, like, this was the game, the indie game that I referenced is a particularly egregious example that sort of has a, like, Return of the King thing going on where it literally feels like it's ending, and then it just keeps going, and then it feels like it's ending again, and then it just keeps going. So imagine that you sat down to watch Return of the King and you had literally no idea how long it was going to be. Like, maybe this movie is going to be 90 minutes. And then every time it appears that it's going to end, you don't know if you're about to, like, get up and leave the theater or not. That's sort of the feeling that I'm talking about. All right. How do you feel about the kind of stereotypical or trope-ish depiction of the novelist as a tortured artist? Just from reading Stephen King's memoirs and such, a lot of what he dealt with was poverty and addiction and later on health problems instead of quote-unquote writer's block. This is a great question. First thing that comes to mind, I don't know that Stephen King should necessarily be your model. I think Stephen King is an exceptional writer in a lot of ways. And I don't mean by that like, you know, he's a really good writer, although obviously, you know, he is, but that he's atypical as a writer. I mean, if you just look at his output compared to other writers, I think he's atypical. But your point still stands. This is a very shallow sort of interpretation of what writer's block is and where it comes from and how it works. Writer's block is a thing that exists. I don't think that it you know, doesn't exist, and so I think, I mean, I can sympathize with the character of Dan. I feel like I've lived some of this experience before, and so it's not that it doesn't feel genuine, it just feels kind of shallow. It's very tropey. It absolutely is. This is a character that we've seen 100 times, and it's not diving into this character as that. It's not diving into that trope deeper than we've seen that trope explored before. I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. I think that happens for two reasons. One of them is relatability. I think, you know, everybody who has written a paper for a high school English class can relate with Dan on some level, because everybody has suffered from some form of writer's block. And the more sort of generic and tropey we keep Dan as his frustrated writer persona, the more everybody can continue to relate to him. If we get deeper into that and we flesh out his character more, it's possible that you could sympathize with the character more. You could feel like the character is better, more fully formed, is sort of a better example of a character and somebody that you care about more. But you're probably going to alienate more people from the sort of direct experience of, oh yeah, I know exactly what he's going through. I've been there. That's one thought that I have. The other is that I don't think this game is about exploring that trope further. I think so Dan is very tropey. Tommy is very tropey. Linda is the least tropey of them. Like, she has more dimensions than any of the other characters, but she doesn't have that many dimensions. She's got like 2. And so everybody in this game as a character is kind of a cardboard character. The game is not really about exploring them as characters, although an argument could be made that it would benefit from that. But the game is really more about exploring the relationships between those characters, even if they are as shallow as tropes. So what is the relationship between the frustrated writer-father and the just a 5-year-old? Like, I don't even know what the trope is there. He's just kind of a flat character. He likes planes. Like, exploring, and not even exploring, but sort of implicitly exploring, asking the player by dint of like having them prioritize these different characters and their relationships, asking the player to think about, I guess, what those relationships are and how those tropes kind of play off of each other. And I think that ultimately the game would be better served from better writing, and by that I mean like deeper writing, a deeper exploration of the characters. But it's, you know, I think that the game works on some level even without that. I don't think that it cripples the game, I guess is what I'm saying. Does it seem like the setting constraint is acceptable or too rigid? We talk about things that happen outside the house, but we never see memories of them. So the memories are really just rehashes of things that we could have read in the endless notes. I'm not sure that I understand 100% the second half of this question, but I think I get the gist of the question. So obviously the game has me constrained to the house, and there's 2 things that sort of happen in the house. One is people leave notes around where they describe the things that they're thinking and feeling, often as relate to other events happening outside of the house. And we see memories of people who are either writing things bizarrely or having conversations, but always having conversations in the house. Like, there's a whole world of memories of the funeral and the conversation that Dan and Linda had at the funeral, that we don't get access to directly because they didn't happen in the house. And so the only way that we could potentially access that kind of a conversation is if one of them subsequently writes about it, and then we read it in a journal or a letter or whatever. I like In general, I like the constraint of I'm haunting this house. And I think that the family is focused enough around the house, the fact that they're very like presently living in the house feels natural and feels okay, and it feels like I always have access to them. I think that there's an over-reliance on like letters and notes and journal entries, but I don't feel like that's motivated specifically by the fact that it's the only way that we can view scenes that happen outside of the house, because I feel like a lot of those notes and letters and journal entries are just talking about, you know, internal monologue or about relationships to other characters, or even about things that happen inside of the house. And so you know, it doesn't seem like it would be one thing if it got to the point where that was what all of the letters were about. They were all conveying information that we couldn't get because we're stuck inside of the house, and then it felt like there were too many of them. But I don't think that's the case. I think if we strip the letters down to just the ones that deal specifically with scenes that happen outside of the house, and then we took all of the other information about what characters are thinking and how they relate to one another and what their hopes and dreams are, and presented that in some entirely different manner, then I would not feel quite so overwhelmed by letters. I think that would bring the letters down to a much more reasonable level. Yeah, so that's my thought on that. The memories are really just rehashes of things that we could have read in the endless notes. I mean, I prefer the memories to endless notes, I guess, is why I don't really understand the second half of the question, because it seems like the memories are brief breaks that we get from endless notes, and the more stuff that could be put into memories, the happier I would be, I think. I mean, I think if more of the stuff that's in notes that doesn't explicitly deal with things outside the house could be placed in memories, that would be even better. How necessary do you think the light possession and self mechanics in the game is to the delivery of the story? The story and the gameplay feel a bit disconnected. Yeah, okay, oh god, oh, that's really, really good. I don't know. I gotta think about that. I agree with you completely that the story and gameplay do feel disconnected, and they're connected only sort of by two things, but they're tenuous connections. One is the narrative of the like 1948 or the prior history of the house stuff. That obviously, like, there's this sense that lights are cues that they can use in those journals to indicate the presence of the ghost, and even to the point of not just like flickering lights in the house, but also apparently my physical manifestation is like a hazy cloud of light. So that makes it very clear, like that gives me something thematic to latch onto as I am somehow connected directly to light. It would be wonderful if somehow that story, that like history of the house story, played out to a point where I understood there was some motivation to the fact that I'm represented by and connected to lights. That I cross my fingers and really hope for that. We'll see. The other connection is this idea that it's possible for me to spook members of the family, and then they will be so disturbed and or distracted by the presence of a ghost in the house that they can't concentrate on the thing that they want that would make them happy that week. Which which kind of makes sense to me. I mean, like, that's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not that much of a stretch. We haven't seen it happen, and so I would be interested to see. I don't know if I actually want to do it. Maybe in the next chapter, after I decide who I want to choose, who I want to prioritize, I will intentionally spook the third character just to see how that plays out. But I can see that actually kind of making some narrative sense, that there's a you as a ghost are potentially a distraction from the things that people need to do in order to heal themselves and their relationships. And since your goal is to heal these people, implicitly, I mean, you know, that's been my goal, at least. You know, that gives me enough motivation to sort of want to stay hidden. On the other hand, if I played the game in story mode where we didn't do the stealth, I don't know that it would feel like it was missing something, except it might feel like it was missing some sort of challenge aspect. I think that the real goal of stealth is to introduce a sense of more gamey challenge to what is a very, very narrative heavy dramatist sort of game. And I think it's reasonably effective at that, honestly. I mean, it does feel disconnected, and so I appreciate the fact that it gives me the option to turn it off. But it's also, I mean, I do feel a sense of challenge, right? I do feel like it's not always easy for me to reach the note or the letter or whatever it is that I want to examine, and I have to sort of keep track of where all of the family members are and wait for them to turn their backs, and that's kind of interesting, and it kind of makes me feel more like a ghost than like a non-entity. Then, you know, this could be a game that feels like you're just, you know, I guess exploring a narrative that is entirely laid out before you, and that's fine. Like, games like that work, or they certainly can work, but I'm thinking about like Gone Home, right? There are a lot of similarities between this game and Gone Home. A big difference is that in Gone Home you have a specific character that you're playing, and a lot of what you're finding out in the house, it relates to your character and your ability to play her, to sort of get into her mental state and role play her. In this game, you know, unless the game were radically re-envisioned so that I played one of the characters, I'm playing a non-character. And I think the fact that I have constraints as a non-character, that I like jump between lights and don't want anybody to see me, makes my character, my like non-entity character, much more interesting than it would otherwise be. And so I do feel like that adds something to the game. Oh god, chat has been talking about voice acting. How do I feel about the voice acting in this game? I'm mostly okay with it. I'm mostly good with it. I'm curious now to go and look and see what chat thinks. The implication here is that chat is not happy with the voice acting in the game. It's a little dry, but it's, I think it's maybe intentionally so. I think it doesn't want to get into the melodramatic because the storylines are already kind of bordering on the melodramatic. I appreciate a little bit of distance to the voice acting. That said, like there was some emotion to Linda's character in the last section when she's talking about her grandmother's death that I bought. I like that. I was into that. I think they've both expressed, like, they're not super expressive, but they've both definitely expressed emotion at a level that I buy it. It seems to work sort of tonally, at least. The fact that the voice acting is sort of inconsistent across material, like sometimes some letters are read and other ones aren't. I haven't 100% figured out what the logic is behind that. It doesn't seem totally consistent. So sometimes I'm just reading letters. So I don't know about that. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna go back and read. Eve suggests that the mother Linda is lacking some intonation, and I hear that. Like I said, it's a little dry, but it hasn't actually bothered me so far. I'll pay more attention to it in the next thing. Okay, one or two more questions. There are a lot of steps for choosing your decision. You need to find 2 diegetic objects, then go to Dan and whisper to him. Is this too many steps? Would it be better if one of these was just a UI button or something, or do you enjoy how embodied the space is? I do enjoy how embodied the space is. I think it's a fair few steps, but it actually feels very straightforward once, like, the first half of the level feels much more involved and complicated than the second half does, where, you know, I'm going into different people's memories, and even that is pretty straightforward, but then, like, I'm scooting around the house trying to read all of the objects that there are in order to figure out what the desired objects are going to be. Once I get to the point where, like, I can read somebody's thoughts and something is highlighted in blue, then it's very simple from there. Like, that's an object that I can find pretty easily, and then the steps are straightforward. Like, I just have to find that object and then find another object and then talk to Dan. And I appreciate that those are all steps, because I could choose not to do the compromise, and that feels like it could sometimes be a valid choice. I was a little torn in this last one about going to the funeral at all. I felt like Dan really needed to work on his novel. And ultimately, it seemed like compromising with Linda was a better option, but I could imagine playing through that and deciding, no, I don't want to compromise. Just put your head down and work on the book. So I like that there's a step there, and I like that then there's another step where I have to go talk to Dan, because it gives me a chance to explore the house. But I guess what you're actually asking is the fact that all of those steps are embodied in the world, that I have to go to different rooms in order to find those objects and then go to the bedroom to talk to Dan. Is that important? I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I do think, like, talking to Dan makes sense. I'm not sure how I would do that differently, because I would not want just like a button to appear on the screen, right, that says you're done. But at the same time, I think there's something very interesting in the fact that these decisions are embodied by objects in the space. And I think the reason that I find that intriguing is because the narrative context is of a haunted house, right? I'm a ghost, but I'm not I'm not obviously like the spirit of a dead person who has unfinished business. There's no indication of that so far. There's no indication of what my unfinished business might be. I feel more like I am a spirit of the house, that I'm some sort of like avatar or invocation of the house, you know, discovering and manipulating the occupants of it. And so from that standpoint, it feels like the house itself is my domain, and the people in it are things that I'm investigating, right? I can move really easily from light to light. I can very... it's like... yeah, like moving through the house is something that I can do very easily. It's just when I encounter people that it becomes tricky. And then in order to sort of get into people's heads, I need to like sneak up behind them and do this whole possession voodoo thing. It just feels like I'm more connected with the space of the house than I am with the actual occupants, and that's why the gameplay is so much around discovering those occupants. And so the fact that their decisions would be encapsulated in objects that are part of the house feels more like it's a liminal space. It's something like that is attached to them and affected by them and that they care about, but is also not a mental state. It's a physical thing. It's in the space where I exist. And so I actually feel like there's some kind of a connection between me and the physicality of choosing those objects in order to make decisions. It is a little weird because, I mean, it seems like once I've decided what I'm going to do, the inaction of that is that I whisper it to Dan. So, you know, what is preventing me from just going up to Dan and whispering the things that I want? It is kind of an arbitrary constraint of the game that I choose objects ahead of time rather than, you know, have a dialogue selection or something like that. But again, I don't know. It doesn't feel... it's not grating on me. It's not the thing about this game that I have a problem with. And it's not the first thing that I would change about this game. You know, I'm much more concerned with sort of the way that it's written, the prevalence of text, and to some extent, I think, you know, the depth of the characters. I think if you were really going to pour more energy into this game, making it more deepening those characters a little bit would be interesting. Maybe better voice acting would help with that, actually. I don't know. Okay, that's, I think, the last question that I'm gonna do. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. Before I go, I'm just learning. Sunday Game Club is, of course, this week, Sunday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Sunday Game Club is going to be playing Alan Wake this week, which is super exciting. I have had kind of a hankering for Alan Wake recently, so excited about that. That should be fun. Also, if you're not aware, Feedback Force is the community-run podcast that is just starting up. Released its first episode, I believe, yesterday, and you can find that on the forum, undefinedbehavior.com/forum. There's a thread there about Feedback Force, the podcast. It just came out, so I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but I am really excited about it. That is Kelso, Kyla, Cage Tiger, Skug3, and Thanarod are are the voices of that podcast. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. That is going to be bi-weekly. So first episode is up. Check back for the second episode in 2 weeks. One last plug for Apartment. Like I said, I'm really excited about this game. I want the Kickstarter to happen. So tweet about it, tell your friends. Try to just spread the word. They're in their last week. I'm pretty sure they're going to make it. In fact, I'm certain that they're going to make it, but they do need a little bit of a final push in order to get there. And then, I don't know if I should announce this. I'm going to announce it and then hope that everything works out. Along those same lines, on Saturday this week, I am planning to get together with 2 of the devs of Apartment, Robin and Richard, and we're gonna do a special play-by-play of Don't Starve Together. The 3 of us are gonna try to play together and talk about that game. So stay tuned to the forum or my Twitter account at NDEF. And I'll give you more information as that comes to light. We haven't settled on a time yet, but I think it'll probably be 6 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday. Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I'm really, really excited about it. And then I will be back next Wednesday for more of The Novelist. And I think we'll probably get through the second month, or this will probably be a couple more episodes. Thanks everybody. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for hanging out with me, and the great questions in the chat. And I look forward to seeing you again on Saturday. Have a great night.